As the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as Imam al-Khatib al-Baghdadi rahimahullah, who died in the year 463 Hijrah, mentioned in the beginning of his book Al-Kifaya, he mentioned that from the greatest virtues of a student of knowledge of Hadith is that his name will be in the same link or the same chain as Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And as a later scholar once quoted, is that a chain or link in a chain, when you move one link, the entire chain shakes or the entire chain moves. So similarly is the one who is attached to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, that virtue, that excellence, and that superiority. So from the reasons behind them traveling was to get a shorter narration. That was the first reason. The second reason behind that is that when there are less people in the chain of narration, when there are less intermediaries, wasa'it, less middlemen between the person who's collecting the narration in his book and the Messenger of Allah alayhi salatu wasalam, then there's less of a chance of a mistake. There's less of a chance of a glitch, of an error. There's less men to investigate and to look into and to research. And this is a very common sense point. If you have 6 witnesses or 6 people who told you, or one person told you, who heard from someone, to the end of the chain or the line of witnesses, or if you just had 2 witnesses, 2 people between you and the actual incident or the happening, without a doubt, for you to look into 2 people and to investigate what they said is much easier and much more simple than 6 people. That's 4 extra people that you have to make sure and double check that they haven't lied. Or if they're not liars, they haven't erred and made a mistake and forgotten what they saw or what they heard. So this is from the reasons behind them seeking a shorter isnad, that which is called sanad al-ali, a shorter isnad, which we can literally translate as a higher isnad, And there are several narrations from the Salaf, from amongst the Tabi'een and amongst the Sahaba, ridwanullahi ta'ala alayhim, with regards to the virtue of seeking a shorter or a smaller chain. طيب, with this being the case, we know that seeking knowledge of Hadith and traveling for it was something which was standard. It was something which was standard. It was something, in many cases, if not most cases, wasn't an option. That if a person wanted to exceed and excel in his quest for Hadith, he had to leave his hometown. And this is something which can be applied even to this day. This modern time in which we live in, we have modern means of communication. We have the internet, phones, mail system, so on and so forth, etc. With this being the case, a person who wants to actually learn a skill and perfect that skill and have an original background of that skill, he has to go out and meet the masters of that skill or that profession, whatever that thing may be. And this was the case hundreds of years ago when there wasn't no internet. There wasn't telephones. There weren't any telephones. There wasn't any telephone system. There wasn't any modern means of communication. Sending letters and messages took a very long time. So a person had to leave his home. If he lived in Kufa and he wanted to hear this hadith scholar and this hadith master, if he wanted to learn from this companion or from this tabi'i, then he had to travel to Yemen. He had to travel to Egypt. He had to go to Ray. He had to go to Khurasan, and so on and so forth, to the different regions in which the Muslims lived and populated during those times. So this was something which was very standard. And the main places to which these scholars traveled in search of hadith and learning from the scholars of hadith, which led up to this compilation of the Sunnah, was firstly the Haramain, Mecca and Al-Madinah. This was the first main 2 cities in which a student of knowledge of hadith would travel. They would go to Mecca and Al-Madinah. And that's very simple or very easy to understand, because those 2 cities are the places where the revelation was directly sent down, where the overwhelming majority of the revelation was revealed to the Messenger of Allah alayhi salatu wasalam. And there were several from the companions who lived there. Many of them lived for a very long time, especially the companions who were young, such as Ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma and Al-Madinah. Many of the younger minor companions, Ibn Umar radiyallahu anhu or anhuma, Aisha, Abu Sa'id, Ubadah ibn Samit, and so on and so forth, who lived in Mecca and Al-Madinah, who had circles in which they sat and narrated what they heard and memorized and saw from the Messenger of Allah or from the other companions who took it directly from the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. After Mecca and Medina, one of the most prominent cities to travel to was Baghdad in Iraq or Iraq. And this is because, as the people of the past said, Baghdad was Ka'batul Ulum. It was the Kaaba of knowledge, the Kaaba of the sciences. And they called it that because so many people traveled to that city. So many people sought after that city as if they seek or travel towards Mecca to go and see the Kaaba and Masjid al-Haram. And this is something which isn't strange whatsoever, because Iraq in general and Mesopotamia in ancient times was, as it's called, the cradle of civilization. There were several major breakthroughs and things that they were far advanced in many other parts of the world during those times. So Iraq was always historically famous and always a major and prominent region. The rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers there, and so on and so forth. It was a very, very, very important part of the earth. A very important part of the earth in general, let alone for the Muslims and the Islamic sciences. So Baghdad was a major place, and as Imam al-Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala said, when you read his biography, he says, Amma Baghdad fala adri. He says, as for Baghdad, I don't know how many times I entered Baghdad. He knew how many times he went to Mecca and Medina and Kufa and Wasit and Sham and this place and this city and this country. He says, but he forgot how many times he went to Baghdad to hear Hadith. And that's because in Baghdad there were so many masters of Hadith during the 2nd and the 3rd centuries. From them is Imam Ibn Ma'in, Yahya ibn Ma'in. From them is Ali ibn al-Madini. From them is Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, Muhammad ibn Yahya al-Dhuhli, and so on and so forth. The list goes on. Abu Hafs Amr ibn Ali al-Fallas. The list goes on of major ulama of Jarh al-Ta'dil, of Hadith, of Sunnah, who lived and resided in Baghdad. So it was a very prime spot for a student of knowledge to go there and hear so many things from the Sunnah of the Messenger of Allah and then record them, either when he got back to his country or while he stayed in Iraq, and actually compile the Sunnah, which we'll explain at another time. Also, from the important places of knowledge in Iraq was the city of Kufa, and the city of Basra, the city of Wasit, and many other regions in Iraq. Outside of Iraq, of course, we had the different centers of Hadith in Egypt. We had the different centers of Hadith in Yemen, the different centers of Hadith in Sham, and Syria, and Ard al-Quds, or the Palestine, and many other cities and villages which were important centers of knowledge in general and of Hadith specifically. So these were from the main places in which the scholars of Hadith traveled to. And we cannot forget also the Persia. There were so many scholars of Hadith, rather, I don't think a person will be incorrect if he said the majority of the scholars of Hadith, especially those who wrote books and compiled major Hadith compilations in the 3rd, 4th century, came from those lands. If you look at the people of Ashab al-Kutub al-Sitta, the scholars of the 6 mother foundation books or foundation books of Hadith, Al-Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawood, At-Tirmidhi, and Nasa'i, and Ibn Majah, they came from that region. They came from that region, let alone those scholars who came after them in the 5th century, in the 6th century. But of the 3rd century, they came from that region. If it wasn't directly from Persia, lands or cities, countries that were very close to Persia, such as we have Khurasan, we have Asfahan, we have Ray, we have Ram Hurms, we have the village of Bayhaq, which Imam al-Bayhaqi was from, Naysabur, and so on and so forth. So these, in brief, and this is, as we said once again, in brief, without the specific detail, are the main centers and main regions to which the scholars of hadith traveled.